This is the most brain-dead argument I have heard on MSNBC, and that is saying something, because there are a lot of brain-dead arguments made on MSNBC. We're about to hear more. So Joe Scarborough argues that journalists who are trying to be objective actually end up helping Trump. So maybe don't be objective. Let's watch.
I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this, but Joe Scarborough and MSNBC may have just dropped one of the stupidest takes in the history of cable television. Take a listen.
But there's a false equivalency going on in the coverage of this race.
Their objectivity actually is not objective at all. It ends up playing to Donald Trump's advantage every day.
In an effort to appear balanced, to appear objective, mistakes are absolutely being made, and standards are being applied to both candidates here when Donald Trump is a different animal. He is an insurrectionist.
Folks, if you enjoy the content, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are new. But you heard it in their own words. According to them, being objective in the news media is a bad thing because being objective and holding both candidates to equal and fair standards helps Donald Trump. Yeah, they really said this out loud, and it was so bad that even Ana Kasparian and TYT spent a lot of time tearing into them, shredding this apart. Let's take a listen to some of that here today. And folks, I still just cannot believe they said that out loud, which really is a damning admission that Kamala Harris must not be that good of a candidate, right? Because if you cover the race objectively, I don't know, during an election cycle, if you hold them to both the same standard, that's bad for Kamala Harris. Take a listen to Ana Kasparian's reaction.
Well, the crew over at Morning Joe on MSNBC, you know, the same crew that wanted Biden to continue running in this presidential race, despite the fact that he was suffering from clear cognitive decline. Yeah, those people, they're furious that journalists would have the audacity of ever reporting anything negative on the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris, because Trump is he's a special threat. And so since they've decided that Trump is a very special threat, well, then journalists should hide information about Kamala Harris from you so you don't vote for Trump and definitely vote for Kamala Harris.
Well, you know, it's a common trend, honestly, in the Democrat Party. You know, he's such a threat to democracy that we have to overthrow democracy, right? We have to undemocratically select a candidate to save democracy. You are obligated to vote for this candidate if you want to protect democracy. We have to censor free speech in order to protect the free press. They do this cycle all the time. It's true.
In other words, they want the media to manipulate you and do the exact opposite of journalism.
But it's for your own good, apparently.
Believe me? Well, why don't we hear co-host Mike Barnicle make his case?
But there's a false equivalency going on in the coverage of this race, in that Donald Trump can say whatever crazy things he wants to say about submarines and sharks and electric batteries, whatever he wants to say. And it's not really covered in the sense that it's covered describing who said it, why he said it, and who the man is, Trump, out of his mind. And always in that story, in the equivalency, the false equivalency by too many reporters and too many American newspapers, there's also, by the way, Kamala Harris changed her mind on fracking. They always throw in something like that in coverage of the story. It's ridiculous. We don't cover the man for how dangerous he is.
Yeah, maybe because she did change her mind on fracking and Americans want the answers to why. Just a crazy thought there? No. Do not cover the race objectively. Now, we obviously know that the Kamala campaign is based on essentially gaslighting the American people, right? Run on no policy, don't really say anything, but oh, she's Kamala Harris, isn't she so great? But to say that out loud, I mean, it's one thing. If you're gonna run propaganda for her, go ahead. But they say that openly. And they don't think people are going to react to this and think, wow, what an unhinged thing to say. Well, let's take a listen.
You don't cover the man for how dangerous he is? I don't know. I don't know what country I'm living in, but I feel like we get wall-to-wall coverage about Trump being a danger to this country.
Yes.
It is incessant.
Yes.
It is all they talk about on MSNBC. Did he just suggest that journalists shouldn't report on Kamala Harris changing her mind on fracking? Is that not an important policy
you would think so.
that voters should be informed about? And also, is he under the impression that telling Americans the truth about where Kamala Harris stands on the issues automatically means that Donald Trump is going to win the election? See, this is when I started my career, when I started working at TYT back in 2007, there really wasn't like left-wing media. There was like Fox News, and the right-wing media infrastructure was kind of being built. And I prided myself and the left wing on the fact that we didn't try to manipulate audiences, and we didn't try to lie to people or cover up the truth about our preferred candidates or preferred politicians. We didn't want to stoop low and do what the right wing was doing with their misinformation, with the fact that they would omit incredibly relevant, important parts of the story in order to make Republicans look good and Democrats look bad. And now we're in this awful era of conditioning audiences and readers to expect journalists to cheerlead like partisan hacks for one candidate or the other. And if you don't do it, if you don't engage in it,
they'll
they get mad at
criticize
you.
Right.
You're supposed to be my cheerleader. You're supposed to cheerlead for my preferred candidate. What are you doing? How dare you talk about Kamala Harris and how she went from being against fracking to now saying she's totally in favor of fracking? How dare you?
It's funny too, because characters like Brian Stelter will constantly go out and say, how dare Trump criticize the press? You know, it's actually dangerous to democracy when Trump says fake news or the media is bad. And then this is what the media says openly. Yeah, we're running propaganda. Yeah, we're gaslighting people. We're manipulating people. It's perfectly okay. But don't you dare criticize it. Well, I mean, you wonder why cable news viewership is declining. You wonder why American trust in the media is at an all-time low. It's not the fault of the American people, despite what the journalists say. It's really not the fault of political characters like Trump either, frankly. It's their own damn fault. And when they say that publicly, this is what they're doing. You wonder why people don't listen to you. Yeah, newsflash, this is probably the reason.
The media doesn't fearmonger about Trump enough? Has he considered that maybe, just maybe, the media had been fear-mongering about Trump so much, so often, that Americans have become desensitized to it? Has he considered that? Has he considered the fact that Joe Biden ran his campaign almost entirely on Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and it wasn't working? Why do you think it wasn't working? This is the most brain-dead argument I have heard on MSNBC, and that is saying something, because there are a lot of brain-dead arguments made on MSNBC. But we're about to hear more. So Joe Scarborough argues that journalists who are trying to be objective actually end up helping Trump. So maybe don't be objective. Let's watch.
Even Arlington, you've seen major newspaper outlets talk about, well, how will this impact Kamala Harris and the issue of Afghanistan after he goes? And he
does a thumbs up and pictures.
Well, and just acts like a brute and you know, desecrates Arlington. That's not a time to say, well, how does it, you know, it's, but again, we see it time and time again. For some reason, the mainstream media, what are we, 9 years in to Donald Trump's era in American politics, still doesn't know how to cover Donald Trump. Their objectivity actually is not objective at all. It ends up playing to Donald Trump's advantage.
I just want to point out really quickly, look here at the bottom of the screen, even TYT is calling it MSDNC, which is a nickname that Trump invented. I think that's kind of funny. But again, I cannot believe you would say this out loud. Objectivity in the media is a bad thing. And I think the funniest part about it is, let's not pretend like the mainstream media is actually objective, right? They obviously are way more anti-Trump than they are anti-Kamala. But the problem, the quiff that Joe Scarborough has is simply the fact that every once in a while they have the veneer of objectivity. Hey, we're asked Donald Trump a million hard questions every day. Let's ask Kamala Harris like maybe 1 or 2 hard questions. Maybe let's ask her about fracking. Again, this doesn't make you an objective journalist. It just means, okay, you kind of have a little bit of objectivity sometimes. According to Joe Scarborough, and let's not forget this fact, he is saying that any objectivity, any degree where you're kind of fair sometimes is a bad thing for Kamala Harris, which I think, again, is an admission that Kamala Harris must be, deep down, a really bad candidate. Because if this election is going to come down to telling the truth about both candidates, and that helps Donald Trump, it must mean Donald Trump's probably the better candidate, but I don't know. Let's take a listen to Anna's reaction.
Don't be objective because it plays to Donald Trump's advantage.
Well, maybe it does, right? Maybe it does.
Why? Because journalists want to answer a question about how Kamala Harris would handle Afghanistan, what her views on Afghanistan happen to be. Do the American voters have the right to know where Kamala Harris stands on those issues? Or should we be kept in the dark because Trump bad? Trump bad. That's what Joe Scarborough wants. He wants journalists to line up and say in unison over and over again, Trump bad. Because that's been real effective, right?
Yeah, it hasn't.
Listen, he wants to be a cheerleader for one side. That's great. Go be a cheerleader for one side. But don't sit there on your boring ass morning show where you try to gaslight the American public about Biden's mental health and pass judgment on people who are trying to get Kamala Harris to answer questions on something amazing, policy, where she stands on policy. Because there are voters out there, believe it or not, who aren't partisan hacks. Those are the individuals who actually end up deciding elections, and they want to know where Kamala Harris stands on policy. Simply hearing Trump bad over and over again doesn't work for them.
But again, this must be an admission that if the American people knew where Kamala Harris stood on policy, where she stood on fracking, for instance, they probably wouldn't like the answer, right? And I think that's the greater point here that Joe Scarborough is sort of unintentionally admitting to. But again, just an insane thing to say out loud, folks. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. But yeah, okay, according to MSNBC, it's actually the duty of the media. Now, we've known this, right? The media has always been a propaganda machine, at least for the past several decades now, but apparently that's their duty. It's actually their job, and it's for your own good. Trust them. Listen to Joe Scarborough, apparently, when he says, it's your duty not to know the truth. I don't know. That said, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.